And we're live. Welcome back to the LOOPCast. Today is the ladies and Tom version of the
Woo!
podcast. I have to say we're kind of overdue. I feel like we go a little dude heavy here sometimes, but I'm really
I feel
excited.
that way too. I'm pumped. I'm like, yes.
Everyone kind of quietly understands Erica's silent frustration with the men on this podcast. We have Erica Ahern, of course, but today we welcome on Rachel Bovard. And I'd like to just start before we even hear from her with one of the best descriptions I think I've seen. It is New York Magazine's nursemaid of the patriarchy, the Atlantic's right-wing nightmare, boy mom, Rachel. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
We typically only welcome people on the show that have basically like hit pieces out on them from the worst of publications. So you're in good company.
Well, I like it.
So we have a lot going on in today's show. We're going to be talking a little Jimmy Carter. We're going to be talking a little bit of feedback on the Vivek tweet. I got a lot of criticism from our take on the last show.
To put it mildly.
And then we get into a few fun Twilight Zones wrap up on 2024. But first, I think we have to point out Jimmy Carter passing away at age 100, lived a long life, leaves quite a legacy of being president, but then also some charitable work afterwards. Rachel, what kind of legacy do you think do you first think when you hear Jimmy Carter?
Well, I mean, what I first think is obviously like Jimmy Carter's second lowest approval rating of all time in the modern era, sort of oversaw a terrible economic climate. Although if you read all the obituaries today, none of it was his fault. He's,
Exactly.
the kindly old man
He's a
that
peanut
was
farmer.
misunderstood. Right.
Yeah.
No, it literally, that's like what they lead with is that he was a peanut farmer. But I do think that there is something to be said for the man Jimmy Carter was after he was president. I do think he managed to sort of rehabilitate himself and became something of a polymath, and has taken on a number of areas of expertise. Also was a Sunday school teacher for a long time and lived sort of a quiet life as much as one does, I suppose, as a former president. So, rest in peace, Jimmy Carter.
Any thoughts, Erica?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very soon after his death, so obviously the takeaway is like pray for his soul, may he rest in peace, et cetera, et cetera. I think that even his legacy after his presidency is a little overblown in some places. I associate him, of course, with the Iran hostage crisis during his presidency, but then even afterwards, this sort of association he had with dictators around the world. I think he was the victim of that progressive mentality that if we can just like be friends with everyone, they'll reform their ways and the world will be a better place. So we think of him during this, I'd forgotten about this until this morning, during the Clinton administration, Jimmy Carter kind of going behind the back. He takes the CNN camera crew over to North Korea and he's like, I'm just going to talk to them. I'm just going to talk to Kim Jong-il.
I forgot about this too.
Oh my gosh. And the Clintons didn't even know he was basically trying to broker a deal with the North Koreans. And again, I think he had this very nice boomer messiah complex, and I don't want to judge the man. I'm sure his intentions were good. Like you said, he was a man of the Christian faith to a certain degree, and
certain strain of it.
Certain strain of the Christian faith.
Definitely what you would consider progressive. I mean, his views on same-sex marriage for sure would be progressive. And
yeah, I mean, he originally, like so many Democrats, originally was against it, and then he was like, well, everyone can just like do whatever they want to do and all that. But yeah, so I don't want to speak ill of the dead too close to the time. I think he is overblown. Mercer did ask me to remind everyone in the chat that Jimmy Carter was given the mercy of living to see a president worse than he was. So we
did he just text you that?
No, I was on a meeting with him earlier today, and Mercer just wanted everyone to
that would have been line. Vintage Josh texting in to get
Mercer line. So even from his wherever he is right now, Mercer has words to say.
Yep.
So that's my takeaway on Jimmy Carter.
Yeah.
One piece I did notice. Sorry, Tom, to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
But when to pivot on something Erica said that I thought was interesting is this commentator was saying Jimmy Carter was the last experiment, basically, of left-wing religiosity in the public office. And now religiosity is almost completely dominated by the right. And I think that is, to some extent, correct. If you look at Joe Biden, kind of wears his Catholicism as an accessory to some extent. It's not as
absolutely.
It really wasn't a defining characteristic of his presidency, despite everybody trying to make it that way. And Jimmy Carter, I think, really did try to present himself. Was he a Presbyterian? I should know this,
He's
but
a Baptist.
he was a
Baptist, yeah.
Baptist. That's
Yeah.
right. He was a Southern Baptist. So I think
Taught Sunday school.
that's right. So he presented that as very much a core element of who he was. But to some commentators, at least that I saw this morning, that was the last gasp of that element being an attractive thing to voters on the left.
That is really interesting. I mean, at least from my read on it, obviously I didn't live through it. It seems like a man kind of elevated who is ill-suited for the job, maybe a potential foreshadowing of if we got Kamala Harris coming into office here. Although it's in different ways. I mean, he legitimately was a peanut farmer. I think there was legitimate resentment against corruption at the time. He kind of rode that wave, kind of hand-plucked to go up to do this. But yeah, someone really ill-prepared for the job. I'm seeing a lot of people in the chat. I lived through the gas lines. I lived through the Iranian hostages. But even, Erica, you brought up, so he won a Nobel Peace Prize for, I believe, Habitat for Humanity. I think he was actually founded
for the Carter Center for his, and part of that was the Habitat for Humanity.
Which is often kind of used as a shield, but I feel like has become popular in the Obama era of meddling in politics post your time as president. You didn't even mention a lot of the Middle East stuff. I mean, the North Korea stuff, crazy, of course. But
stuff with
he
Assad.
was, stuff with Assad, crazy, stuff on him trying to because his big project was I can solve the Middle East.
Yes.
Camp David Accords in Egypt and Israel, which the Israel problem hasn't gone away, by the way. It's still very hot there. We still see a lot of problems. And speaking on predictions into 2025, I would love to see the Trump administration make some meaningful progress there. But yeah, of course, pray for the repose of his soul, lived a long, long life. And rest in peace, Jimmy Carter, former president. I think Trump had a very good, magnanimous statement on that. I'm kind of happy to still see that there's not the maybe instinct to dunk on someone immediately after they die. It's just well, he did actually serve the country and he served during a stressful time. Even if he wasn't great by people's standards, he still did that, and pray for the repose of his soul. So Rachel, I'm actually really excited to have you on because last week, let's just say, we talked about the infamous Vivek Ramaswamy tweet and Elon Musk's affection for HB1 visas, or H1-B rather, or is it HB1 or H? I've said it so many times. H1-B. And I saw you actually wrote an article in 2020. Let me just first, and this is unfair to probably both of you because you weren't on the show. I discussed the tweet. I'm somewhat of an angry populist. I wasn't a huge fan of having a finger wagged at me. But a lot of people zeroed in on the element. They were seeing the tweet as he's right because, and a lot of people zeroed in on the public school system. Public school system failed the kids. Look at the statistics in Colorado. Majority of children can't read there. Schools and colleges teach at the lowest level. So a lot of people are attributing it to education. I think as this conversation's advanced, it really is zeroed in on H1B and immigration. So I almost wonder if we put that to the side for the second to just talk about, as cooler heads have kind of prevailed, the H1B conversation. You wrote an article in 2020. Can you just give a very cold, facts-based, what is the H1B program? Why are people upset about it now? What are the two sides?
Yeah, this was a piece I did back when I was on the board of contributors for USA Today, prior to them dissolving the board of contributors. I like to think it was my fault, but I don't know. But to go to the specifically to the H-1B program, this is a highly skilled worker visa. It is supposed to be a temporary visa under which companies seek out highly skilled talent overseas to bring in for very specific jobs to do for them for a specific limited period of time. However, and like many of the sort of, let's give them the benefit of the doubt, right? Like well-conceived immigration programs, this one has just turned into something that has been completely gamed, and what it is described as doing no longer reflects what it actually does. And so there's a ton of, there are legitimate H-1B visas, right? Where you bring in, and interestingly, I know a couple of my very good friends were H-1B visa holders specific for like very highly skilled worker, industry elements. But most of what happens now is you have these, what they call body shops, where these consulting firms have been set up specifically to play arbitrage with the labor market. They bring in, they win the lottery on H-1Bs, and then they bring in these workers largely from India and China, and they are mostly go to Silicon Valley tech companies, but also companies like Con Edison. Disney is a very big utilizer of H-1Bs, and they're not highly skilled worker visas. They're marketed that way, but essentially what they are is this middle management, $75,000 to $90,000 IT jobs, and these companies will pay these what they call body shops to bring in these H-1B visa holders because they get them at a flat rate. And then the part of the reason is that these body shops are basically keeping them as indentured servants. Their presence in the United States is tied to this visa. They can't get fired. They're kept in really like low wage conditions by these consulting firms. And a lot of these companies just use them to displace the American workforce. There was this is not a new problem. I know sort of it's new to the discourse, but it's almost cyclical. We talk about this every time there's a mass layoff at one of these companies. And as recently as 2016, Jeff Sessions, who was then senator, held a subcommittee hearing in the Senate Judiciary Committee where he brought in a guy who basically had just been laid off from Disney. And the man broke down in tears in front of the Judiciary Committee, describing how he had just received he'd worked at Disney his whole career. He'd received the highest available performance review days before he was then laid off and forced to train his Indian risk replacement on an H-1B. And the humiliation, you talk about dignity in work, you talk about the conditions that we want to see for middle America and middle class Americans. That was revolting to me. It was stomach turning to watch this. And unfortunately, that's what the program is largely being used for. It's a cut rate foreign underclass, essentially, that cuts out middle American workforce. And until we solve that problem, I don't think you have a healthy H-1B program. And that's what I think people are really getting at when they're upset about it. And the Vivek Ramaswamy tweet, I think, just completely blew by it. Like, there's a number of issues going on. Right, you can argue that Vivek has highlighted a legitimate one, but we're not hiring the best and the brightest for these programs. We're hiring, cheap foreign talent that's displacing, in many cases, Americans that have more skills.
Well, and I was struck too, digging into the numbers a little bit this morning, that this is just another case of Congress passes a law, H-1B. They have this regulation. It's supposed to be capped at 65,000 new visas a year. Like you said, they're supposed to be time limited for very specific purposes. The law itself, I read through the first, page and a half of the how many pages every law is now. But reading through it, you're like, okay, this makes sense. I can see this limited number of people being beneficial for America. And yeah, we want to skim the top talent off the rest of the world. I get it. But then you look at the actual numbers in practice. Last year, they let in a total of 188,000. The year before that, 127,000. The year before that, just slightly less under the Biden administration. And really just the government bloat that organizations like DOJ are hopefully going to start to cut away at. You're seeing this complete abuse of the law and a lack of enforcement from, of course, the Biden administration, but really from the government bureaucracy and bloat in the swamp.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also at odds. One more element to this. It's the government's at odds with itself, as it is in so many cases, because in the United States, we spend roughly $3 billion a year incentivizing STEM education here at home. But then when you look at the Census Bureau statistics, there are 2 times as many STEM graduates in the United States as there are STEM jobs. And the majority of these mid-level STEM jobs are being taken up by these foreign H-1Bs. Mm-hmm. Why are we spending money and then our immigration system is at odds with our incentive?
Undercuts that effort, right?
Yeah, it makes no sense.
Yeah, and then, back to the public schools conversation, we spend a nauseating amount of money per student So I think what bothered me about the answer to this and Vivek being very tone deaf in this respect is, as someone that, I'm 26, I guess I graduated college 4 years ago. I see a lot of forces working outside of me and then me doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and then not getting the achieved result that, say, people of different generations did in America. And the idea of just bootstrap it, you're not working hard enough, is just kind of that extra kind of FU insult to an already very frustrated generation. The H-1B conversation, of course, dovetails into immigration policy at large, in which what were we shown over the last 4 years? Millions upon millions upon millions of people were just let into the country, given benefits. So on the school conversation, why aren't people able to read in Colorado? Well, it's because people who don't speak English or don't speak good English are put into the public school system. If you talk to teachers, one of the biggest obstacles they're facing right now is They are inheriting people into a publicly funded system that American taxes pay for that do not speak English. How are you supposed to teach the next generation of Americans in a classroom that doesn't share the same language? Is next to impossible. So if you want to talk about lowering standards in that way, you then go on to college. Even if you work the hardest, you get the 5.0 GPA, you do all these things, you go study computer science. Great, you graduate from your state university, and now I'm like, I have to now compete with people brought here that they're going to pay lower wages, that don't have the same rights as Americans, that are this temporary shadow workforce that I have no control to compete with. I could go apply to all of these firms. They're going to choose the lower labor every time. And yet I'm told that this is somehow good for me as American. It's good that we're taking these people where it's good. I would say it's not as an American because I can't get a job. So it feels like the bootstraps working 80 hours a week is kind of it's tone deaf and frustrating to young Americans. And this is speaking from someone who I have a job that I benefit from that. But I think of America, what frustrates me philosophically, and I'm actually really exciting. It's exciting we're having this conversation. I feel like the H1-B discourse has really accelerated this. Is America a country? What is America? And what does it mean to be American? If it's just about productivity and bringing in the most productive people that are going to work 80 hours a week, what's stopping us from deporting the laziest of Americans, the disabled Americans? Are we just a shell company for the tech right or whatever the culprit is, to make as much money to push the GDP further? It doesn't matter whether or not your hometown is hollowed out in the process, as long as it moves the needle. And to me, that is not a definition of a sustainable country in any way, shape, or form. And so I'm glad we're having the conversation now.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that this is something where the thought of someone like J.D. Vance is exciting to me, because what we're seeing is sort of the right being very market-based. We're going to have a free market economy. We're just going to focus on capitalism and getting things. It's the economy, stupid, right? That argument. And then on the other hand, you have the ideological impetus between abuses of the legal immigration system and the opening of the border. And I think that what you're getting at is that there has to be a both and, right? We need to recover the soul of what it means to be an American and a country, and everything that entails. It's not just about, an American is someone who pulls himself up by their bootstraps and is independent and doesn't depend on anyone. I mean, that's as soulless as what's on offer from socialism, I think. It's meeting in the middle where you have it. Yes, we are a dependent people, and where we are born, our birthplace, our collective memory, our history, our traditions that we share, the education that we receive is a vehicle of making who we are as America, and that the government's role is to protect those interests of those people. And again, I'm all for a healthy immigration system and growing the U.S. population in a way that makes sense. I think a lot of the anger that we're seeing on the right in reaction to Vivek is that we don't have that. The open border is unhealthy. And at the same time, even the legal system that we have is clearly not doing what it's meant to do, as Rachel just explained, the ins and outs of why with this one program. So, yeah, I think I'm just excited that, I think we were talking about this before the show, given the results of the election, we can even have this conversation, because if it had gone the other way, we wouldn't be having a conversation, just like we wouldn't be having a conversation about abortion regulation, because it would be a totalitarian government that we just issued in. Whereas at least here, we're able to get messy.
J.D. Vance subtly contributed to this conversation. He did retweet this from Steve Cortez, quote, "One of the things you will hear people say sometimes is that America is an idea. America is not just an idea. It's a group of people with a shared history, common future. It is, in short, a nation." That was as much as he went to say. They did accelerate this to Trump. I think Trump did an interview, and people were taking different things from this. Don't necessarily agree with, but the bottom line here is I can share. He said, they said Trump supports immigration visas backed by Musk. I have many H1-B visas on my properties. I've always liked the visas. I've always been in favor of the visas. That's why we have them. I have many H1-B visas on my properties. I've been a believer in H1-B. I've used it many times. It's a great program. I think he specifically referred to it as in we have people, high-skilled people coming in through that, which many of this feels like kind of talking past each other almost at this point.
Yeah.
I feel like we're all kind of on the same page. If we bring in the top 0.01% to do savant genius level engineering, that's good for America. But bringing in someone to replace a truck driver, as you can go take a look on the publicly available H1-B application program, there's truck drivers being asked for coming from overseas. That, to me, is not what we're being sold. So if we
There's
figure that out,
literally
it's not something.
7-Eleven cashiers on the H1B visa.
So outrageous.
No, it is. But I think it gets to this point, and JD Vance, I think, is a seminal figure in this conversation, because he basically is saying America and what it means to be an American is not a GDP, right? There is more to being an American than simply what the stock market says we're doing. And I think that is a reflection on the last, if you want to critique the right, where I'm coming from basically is that the last 30 years, that's how we were defining the well-being of the country. Mm-hmm. And in some respects, I think that was fair then, because the culture was there was a cultural consensus. The culture could take care of itself.
We were kind of running on fumes, right? We were
kind of running on fumes, but we agreed on the basic norms, right? I'm a public school educated kid. And when I was in public school, my pretty very rural community had this public school. We all still agreed that a woman was a woman, right? And that nobody could change their gender. And, we agreed on these basic things that we don't agree on anymore. So I think to look simply at the market, I think ignores, it's like that meme where the guy's sitting at the table drinking his coffee while the room's on fire. And he's like, it's fine, right? Like you have to be able to look at the rest of the culture and say, no, there actually is a problem. And, I think to the point Erica was making, this is why I have my very controversial take on school choice. This idea, right, that, if we just infuse the market into schools, it will fix the school system and that will fix everything. Well, it will, right, for some families, but what about the public schools? Some people are going to remain in those schools. Some people aren't going to have the ability to move to a private school or take a voucher and go somewhere else. And those are going to become citizens, right? Mm-hmm. They're going to become voters and contributing members of society, you hope. So why wouldn't you want to care? Why wouldn't you want to stay and fight for the integrity of that public school and the school board and the education that people are being taught? Because again, in America, we aren't just a GDP. We're citizens, and we're human beings. And what does it mean to actually live a good and compelling life? I think you can do that alongside this sort of cowboy libertarian streak that Americans have always had. I love that about us.
Yeah,
right? We are really independent people, but we care about each other as a community too.
Yeah, and I want to ask you this, because I think right now public school basically has an impossible task, because we don't agree on so much, and a very central part of this. So this has been shown up a lot. It's a Pat Buchanan quote on what a nation is. Is it not a people of common ancestry, culture, and language, who worship the same God, revere the same heroes, cherish the same history, celebrate the same holidays, share the same music, poetry, art, literature, held together, in Lincoln's words, by, quote, bonds of affection, mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone? If that is what a nation is, can we truly say America is a nation? I mean, I like to pick apart this quote when it comes to education. Aren't we suing people for praying after football games? I mean, you can't mention God in many schools, the same heroes. I would say that many national heroes have been torn down over the past, I don't know, however many years. Same history we dispute, same holidays. You can't even mention certain holidays now. It's like, so how, the tough thing about public school is it basically needs to be radically reformed. I think everyone agrees on that. But how do we come together for a shared consensus of what that is?
Yeah, and I would say, too, it's not just that we've torn down the old, but that it has actively been proactively replaced with the new. So if you go through that quote again and you just replace it with the heroes of the LGBTQ movement, if you replace it with the god of, abortion and Moloch, and you all of those things are there in the public school system. It's just a fundamentally, to use the words of Obama, right, from his first term, a fundamentally remade America. So what we're looking at here isn't that we just have a wasteland of torn down in the public school system, but that we actually have a new nation that was refounded on the photo negative imagery of the Judeo-Christian foundation that we were built on. So we're looking at a very difficult road back, but I agree with Rachel that even those of us who have opted out of the system for our own children, we still have a responsibility to participate in the making of the civic fabric of our country. And that includes running for school boards, even if your kids aren't in the system. It is mind-boggling to me whenever we get the stats from our city. We spend $18,000 a year on each high school student in our city here in Connecticut. And I'm looking at what I spend for one of my kids for homeschooling. I mean, we're talking like under $3,000 a year for a child to get a phenomenal education, to be able to think critically, to pursue wisdom and the liberal arts, and to be able to enjoy life and be happy and not be subject to the anxieties. I mean, talk about the emotional failures of our education system as well as the academic. But I look at the number differences and I'm like, okay, this is where the cowboys need to get their cowboy boots on and get in there and offer a new way of looking at it. There's no reason we should be spending this kind of money for that kind of failure in our public school system. But until you inject some of the new ideas coming from, I think, the homeschool community, from the Catholic school community, from alternative education communities back into the public school system, they're just going to continue to wallow in this overblown, pricey failure of an education. But anyway, I just went off on my soapbox there. I got the bill. I got the property tax bill last week. I'm like, what are we doing?
Yeah. Good reason to be emotional after that.
Anyway,
I think we probably have the most iPads per capita for our school kids, though.
No doubt.
No doubt. No doubt.
Also, I'm not sure, maybe you guys have more to contribute to this too. I feel like this all kind of dovetails too with, it feels like a lot of decisions were made for Americans without their consent. One of the recent ones coming up is, well, if you deport all the illegal immigrants, then avocados are going to cost $1 more. You wouldn't want that, would you? And easy answer for me, yes, I would definitely do that. But in regards to our goods, middle America, I was reading a really interesting critique on meritocracy, which, of course, whoa, watch out when you do that. Edmund Burke makes many of them. But I do think meritocracy is a really thin glue to keep us together, because who's to say someone's merit is better or means something different than someone else's merit, if we can all even agree on a shared definition of merit. But one of them is, we've basically made trade-offs to say, make a few more bucks, add to the GDP, but now nothing's really made in America anymore. And the person down the road, you don't even really know what they do. Like, they go out and maybe they work on Excel spreadsheets for a big multinational. And I'm not saying everyone, of course, I don't want to denigrate anyone here, but like the days of someone having a trade down the road and you knew someone's dad made this, or they contributed to making a car in America. I mean, I'm from the Detroit area. That doesn't exist anymore. And now all of a sudden we get flooded with, so I can go on Amazon and buy something real cheap now for plastic, but it's going to break in 3 days. I mean, think about things made before that still exist that were made in America in the 60s. This idea of just like making the trade-off for cheaper stuff was made without my knowledge, and I'm kind of mad about it in some ways. And I'd like to reclaim a little bit of, this was made in America. Even if it costs a little bit more, it's going to be hard to invest in and maybe is not as good temporarily. I'd like it to be made in America. Is that even possible to get back to at this point?
I mean, I'm going to say that would be a long road to go. You almost need like some kind of black swan event to catapult us into making our own goods again. I think that it's easy to say we didn't make the choice, and like you personally didn't make that choice, Pogo, but in a way we did, right? Over the years, enough people made the choice that I want more cheaper stuff because it was easier, because you could feel richer, because it just feels good. And I think that it's a both and. Yeah, there was a lot of top-down machination going on from the federal level, from big corporations making these decisions to offshore and all that. But we, the American people, as a body politic, we did make choices in the way that we consumed that went along and fed that to get us to the point where we're at today. And I think it takes a real countercultural decision for families to make, to say something like, this Christmas, every child gets one gift and it's all going to be handmade. I mean, that is a choice some people make.
I don't think that enough
really
consumers making these small choices are going to do it. I think it needs to come at a political level. And part
at this point, probably there has to be some kind of top-down.
Sorry, Rachel, I would like to hear your opinion.
The black swan event that kind of did happen on this was COVID to some extent. right?
That's a
I
good
mean,
point.
potentially less consumer goods. What I mean, the object lesson of Western governments not having access to masks and ventilators and basic inputs to make pharmaceuticals here in the United States, and realizing the extent to which we rely on China for things like vitamin C, and not to mention all the rare earth minerals, that I think should have been a wake up call. And it felt like it was to
Hmm.
some of us, but it didn't really shake Washington, I think, in the way that it needed to be. I think there's a lot of sort of rhetorical hand waving now about bringing home supply chains, but I don't actually see it happening. And I think that was really scary to me. The face of we apparently sit at the peak of modern industry and at the peak of economic dominance, and yet we couldn't make our own drugs, right? Like
Yeah.
that I
Right.
think is a huge problem. And
Shocking.
but I think, to the point that both of you are making, that was a political choice. That was a policy choice that was made intentionally in our name. And I think if voters want to return that choice, they want to take it back, then I think that we have to. And I think, this is part and parcel of the tariff argument, right? But you have, because a lot of this is born out of trade agreements that were, cut in the, obviously NAFTA being the preeminent one, but over and above, you have these multinational trade agreements that I think have disadvantaged the American consumer. It's advantaged us that we have very cheap goods, to
Hmm.
Yeah.
Tom's point, but we've lost a lot of our very highly skilled abilities here in the United States, and I think it's going to be a policy choice to pull some of that back.
And I think that's what the Trump election was in part about, is that people started to see that. And Trump is promising to pull back the reins on all of those policy choices. So, yeah, I think bringing up COVID, that was a black swan event. And maybe we did learn our lesson enough to elect Trump and give him another shot at actually making a difference in long-term changes to the way Washington runs, which is really exciting possibility.
Yeah, the silence, social media silence of Trump and JD signify to me that they're pretty comfortable with where this is going. Like if they were less disciplined or whatever. Like, okay, so Doge is an example. I know, Rachel, you came and wanted to talk about Doge, and I'm happy to let you, because to me this was kind of a nice. I'm actually glad this is happening now, because no heads really have to roll at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Trump's not even in office yet. We don't even know what the capability of Doge or whatever is. And Elon and Vivek seem to be very, 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 very comfortable in their positions, newfound positions, maybe a little bit too comfortable, some might say. What do you think Doge? What do you think about Doge in general? Let me just throw that out there. Do you think it's going to be successful? What do you think is a result of this little spat?
So I have a little bit of a cynical, maybe not quite black pill take on Doge, but I'm a little bit, my eyebrow is going to raise about Doge, because but I think a little bit of it is I'm a product of the Tea Party, right? I came to Washington during the Tea Party, and Doge to me is like a coma patient waking up and discovering the Tea Party again, and like I'm watching everyone do it in real time. It's, if you remember, right, in 2010, 2011, this was the exact same phenomenon that swept in that sort of new wave of Republicans. Rand Paul, Ron Johnson, Marco Rubio, all these people ran and won on this idea of we have to cut waste in government, and everything was like, can you believe we are spending $500,000 on squirrels on a treadmill? It's outrageous,
Yeah.
and like, we're going
Yeah.
to cut this waste. And the result was nothing happened.
Yeah.
Literally, like, nothing happened. And my sort of long-term thesis on this is that the election of Donald J. Trump can be traced all the way back to the failure of Washington to do anything in response to the Tea Party, because that was the beginning of the populist rage, right? It was when people realized, it was like the bank bailouts of 2008, where the, swanky execs got bailed out, but people's grandparents lost everything they had in the stock market. I think that was a real wedge point for a lot of people. And what I hope from Doge this time around is that it doesn't just become a squirrels on a treadmill exercise, that it actually leans into the systemic dismantling of the administrative state, essentially the deep state, whatever you want to call it, because I do think that so much of what happens in Washington now is outside the purview of representative government.
Yes.
Like
100%.
Congress doesn't even have control over it. The executive barely has control over it to some extent. So I think they really have to get in there and, I'm sorry, dismantle it. Like fundamental destruction of the machine is the only thing that matters to me from Doge. So if we're going to get distracted with these shiny objects of like, oh look, they gave the pheasants heroin and we paid for that. Like, yes, it's outrageous. I agree. We should not be doing it, but it is such the tip of the iceberg compared to kind of what we're dealing with. So that's my like kind of cynical take on Doge.
I don't even know if that's cynical though, because does that just mean that to me the failure of the Tea Party was they found legitimate outrage, which is good politically, but it didn't lead to fundamental change.
Right.
So
exactly.
you could use this politically potent, because in reality, the funny thing about the pheasants or whatever, it's such a small percentage of U.S. spending. The vast majority of our debt spending is on entitlements. It's on Medicare. It's on which vast. So all this extra stuff is fun on the outside, which you can use for the outrage. But until you actually start getting at, as you're saying, the systems, then it's going to be kind of a fun flash.
Well, and this is my post Tea Party take is like, I don't even care so much about the amount of spending, the like aggregate at the end of the day. What I want is the control taken away.
Yes.
Right. I like DHS should not have a speech police. And that's essentially what they've built for themselves, right? They have literally these like centers of disinformation or whatever, like take it away, rip it apart, rip it out of the ground, like burn it and salt the earth with its ashes. Like that's what I want from Doge. We can make it about the spending and how much money we're going to save from firing all these bureaucrats, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, like I want my freedom back. I want to live like peacefully. I don't want FBI spies in my parish. I don't want, peaceful pro-life protesters being arrested outside the clinic. Like that's what I want, and we can cloak it in this like 2010 vernacular about like spending and squirrels on a treadmill, or we can acknowledge that we need to like tear down the system brick by brick. And that's what, if the Doge can do that, then I will be the first to sing its praises.
100%. Yeah, I think that the other factor that we've talked about on the show, besides just the spending as well, is the personnel who get themselves in there who are not elected. And the federal bureaucracy, I mean, originally in like these cabinet positions and everything, you weren't supposed to be able to hire and govern using personnel who were political activists, right? Or who were, they're supposed to be outside of that realm. But what we've had in the last 40, 60 years is this kind of burrowing, right? Where people get into Washington, D.C. and they never leave. They just get shifted around to different positions.
Dare I say outsourcing?
Oh, yeah, right. It sounds familiar.
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry, I'm starting to lose my voice here. But I think, which is probably a good thing. But Erica, shut up. But I think that this trait, moving people around from place to place. So yeah, you can eliminate all these positions, but if those same people just get shuffled over to another position and they're still in there making decisions that affect our day-to-day lives, I think that's what Rachel, probably you're talking about with like, I want my freedom back. I want the people I elected to do their job and then to be held accountable for when things go south, and that just hasn't happened yet. We don't live under a representative government right now in terms of the regulations. And something a story that made me really mad last week over Christmas is that speaking of HHS, probably my second least favorite cabinet or government agency, but HHS last week, they decided just, in the waning days of the Biden coma, that they're going to pull these rules and regulations that they had that were going to put the Little Sisters of the Poor back in court because it was going to force them to pay for abortion and contraception for the nuns on staff or something.
Yeah, take care of the most important issues.
But just a week ago, 2 days after Christmas, or 2 days before Christmas, Becerra just says, "Oh, by the way, we're not going to instate these rules that we've spent 2 years formulating, getting public comments on. CatholicVote was a big part of pushing back on. They published the rules last spring. The Little Sisters of the Poor have to get back with their lawyers. They have all this money going on and round and round. And then they're just like, oh, by the way, we're not going to publish the rule. Ha ha. And no explanation, nothing. We're just not going to do it. And you're like, these people have no sense of the pain. Well, maybe they do, and they laugh at it. And they should not be in charge of anything. Again,
probably
I could go on and on. Made me so angry. They should probably be in jail. I would just like the rule of law back, okay? Like, I don't want retribution. I don't want anything. I just want us to get back to a place where if the immigration bill says 65,000 people, that's what you get. If the rule says, that everyone has to have health care, that's what we get. And then Congress changes the rule, because that's who I elected to change rules.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's exciting about all this, and maybe like a peaceful resolution to the H1-B debate, because I do think we're debating with a lot of people that are friendly, if not exactly the same philosophically. And we're having open, robust conversation about what it means to be an American, what it means to do business in America, what does America winning actually mean? All of these are secondary to the fact that we just got shackles off our back of like, you couldn't say any of this out in the open before. I just think you brought up the censorship, and it's really hard to wrap your mind around how complex, vast, and powerful of a ray gun was twisted and pointed at the American people. I mean, these things were started off as like spy initiatives for other countries. And you're like, okay, dictators, maybe we need to keep an eye on them or whatever. And then all of a sudden just aggressively weaponized and pointed at the American people to the point where they couldn't even get legitimate information. Mike Benz is phenomenal on this. I'd recommend anyone. I tried to explain this on the podcast. I sound like a conspiracy theorist because it genuinely is a conspiracy theory. Like but real. We really were like, with your own tax dollars, weaponized censorship upon the American people. We get that off our back, fortunately, here. So now we have these kind of second tier conversations about immigration, what it means to be American, rule of law, everything like that. And I'm really confident, actually, that probably first time in a while, and hopefully don't get let down here with Trump and JD Vance, that they can at least get the bare minimum out of the way so we can start having productive conversations about making a good country.
Yeah, and people are like, oh my gosh, there's been a wedge driven in MAGA, and there's rifts in the crack. I'm like, no, this is democracy. Like, we're actually arguing about things in public. A little bit of chaos, and like, I'm glad I was wrong about riots in the streets after the election. I'm glad I was wrong about weeks and weeks of election denying if Trump got into office. I am so glad I was wrong about that, because that kind of chaos, bad. This kind of chaos, this is a sign that we are actually doing American things again. Like we're talking about them and arguing about them.
Yeah. Well, I think it's reassuring to me too, that like maybe the Tea Party, the failure of the Tea Party doesn't repeat because the base is just not having it. Right.
Yes.
The fact that we are actually having a pretty sophisticated debate about like one narrow provision of immigration law. And it's not just like talking heads on TV. It's like randoms on Twitter that know a ton about
this. It's pretty awesome. Yeah.
I mean, I'm happy about that. Right. Yeah. Like to Erica's point, that's an informed electorate is what that is.
Yeah.
And it's people who are saying like, nah, like you're going to do what we elected you to do kind of thing.
Totally. I wish that there was a fly in the wall for me trying to explain to my wife, like, Tom, why are you on Twitter at 9 p.m. during Christmas break? And like, you have no idea, like HB1's like,
this is important.
This is insane.
Yeah.
Like,
I had that exact conversation with my husband. Because I was like at my parents' house. I was like, what are you doing? I was like, there's a huge debate about H1-B. And he was like, just like pour me more wine because I don't want to know what's going on. Like,
totally.
Because he's a normal person.
Right. Elon Musk just threw out the F-bomb of people that hate him. I really, a minor element to all of this, like people have talked in almost, sorry, I need to learn how to speak. It annoys me when people do the kind of loser talk of, well, we disagree, but it's good because, this good's coming out of this good coming out. It's like, I just want to argue. Like I like to debate. I do have to say though, I feel like a lot of these people that were maybe small L liberals have come over in the big tent now. To the new side that doesn't want to be censored up and down, doesn't want lawfare weaponized against them, and honestly may have not sincerely encountered ideas, say, from Pat Buchanan or people that are American, that believe in an American soul and identity and nation. They're just really smart tech bros that have come over and want to be excellent in that area. So I do think that they're actually potentially open to a lot of these ideas and perspective they haven't gotten before. And maybe that's the element that's exciting about this, and I want people to keep in mind, is this is a continual conversation. And I think even just seeing Elon kind of evolve so publicly as he does everything, and Trump too, like talk about someone being public on Twitter and maybe the most public ever. I'm seeing evolution. I'm seeing movement. And whether or not you say that's behind the scenes or out in public, it doesn't really matter. It's encouraging. I'm like, okay, we've been heard. Like for the first time, we've been heard because Biden hasn't really been all there, but it feels like stuff's moving, stuff's happening. I'm really excited about the future. Would you say, Rachel, what would you say going into 2025 as this is kind of first show before the new year. What are you most excited for going into 2025?
I mean, I think this whole, whether I'm excited for it, I don't know if I am or not, but I think the first 100 days of this administration is going to be like the make or break point for whether or not we get any of this in the next 4 years. And so I'm super excited. I know people probably have many opinions about this, but I think that a lot of Trump's cabinet picks are in that vein of the unexpected, but like relentless doers. And a lot of this isn't true for all of them, but many we've had this habit, I think, of picking cabinet appointees that have come from industry or come from the sectors that they're going to now head. And I think Trump has made a conscious decision, I think, to pick disruptors, right? To pick people. He's read his election as the base wants disruption in these agencies. And I think that's what hopefully we're going to get. Now, whether or not the Senate gets on board with this plan, I don't know. I think that Senate Republicans are going to be the biggest enemy Trump has in a lot of ways.
Once again,
yeah,
we've seen that before.
But the difference would be he knows.
Yes.
I don't think he knew the first time in. How could he? But I think he definitely understands who the real enemies are this time.
Yeah, but like I'm excited to see what can be done with cabinet secretaries who, again, to your point, everybody's going in eyes open this time. Mm-hmm. Like at least in Trump 1, what we learned is that the swamp exists. The people who live in there are swamp creatures, and they have teeth, and they will come out and try to claw you. We know that now. So we're going in with the hazmat suits.
Yeah, 100%.
Medieval armor, chain link.
Yeah.
Erica, I posited that question to you as well. Most excited for 2025.
Okay. Most excited for 2025. I read an article by historian Niall Ferguson. He was talking about the global vibe shift. And I am interested. It's a really good piece. It's over at Free Press. Yes, Pogo, it's over at Free Press. I know. I
have opinions on the Free Press and Billy Weiss.
It's all good. It's all good. Niall's awesome, though. And I'm excited to see excited and terrified a little bit to see what goes on the global stage this year, specifically in the Middle East. I think that we're already seeing sort of the dismantling of the Iranian show of force that was going on there and destabilizing a lot of the region. Even the day Trump was elected, you started to see shifts on the global field, the playing stage. I don't know if I'm excited in terms of optimism. I'm more just like, okay, what comes next? I'm not just like, oh, well, World War III and we're all going to die in a nuclear holocaust, as I was maybe 3 months ago. But I feel like something actually might happen in a positive direction in some of these theaters of war that we have going on.
No doubt.
On the home front, what am I excited for on the home front? Yeah, I love the whole of not every nominee individually on the Trump nominee panoply, but as a whole, taking them all together. I do feel with Rachel that there is something new and markedly different from Trump v1 that's going on here. And even if he can confirm 75% of them, there could be a real shakeup that has long-term implications. I'm also excited. Can I say one more thing? Keep going. I'm also really interested to see what this like Trump-Musk alignment does. I mean, we have like probably the most significant political figure on the global stage in Trump, and then we have the richest man on the planet and one of the most weirdest thinkers. I mean, he is weird. JD Vance was not weird, but he's weird. And just to see what that does for history, a little bit of trepidation once again, but also just feeling like there's an inflection point going on, and I'm not quite in a position to predict what's going to happen with those two.
I think what could illustrate this more than over the weekend, there was an account on a space that someone was saying was a burner account for Elon Musk. And then he decided to have a conversation with the burner account, and they sound identical. And I would not be shocked if he found some way to AI model his voice and still have it be him. But I don't know. And this is the richest man in the world. It's all at the same time.
By the way, what I really love about this is that we finally have like a shared cultural moment in America about like watching all of this happen, because that was the thing to like go back to like Vivek's tweet, and it's like the meta narrative like hanging out there this whole show. But when he's like, oh, we just need to watch different TV shows because everyone watches Saved by the Bell and all this kind of stuff. nobody watches the same TV anymore, Vivek.
No.
Like the
You were so
nicheification. Yeah, like everybody has different YouTube shows, streaming, whatever. Trump and Elon Musk have brought us back to like a shared cultural touchstone. So
That
look
is
at that.
such an interesting way of putting it. And that
I love
also
that.
annoyed me so much about the tweet is like sleepovers, Vivek.
Oh, kind of.
Sleepovers are the
What?
reason why we're not successful. Give me a
no.
break.
Yeah.
We got to do more Math Olympiad. And don't even get me started on all this, because the beauty of American culture is that it's produced great athletes who are also great writers. Theodore Roosevelt has written more than most academic scholars will in their entire lives.
To be fair, he was 120 years ago. TBF. Like,
True, but like think about
give me a reason.
You can argue about the culture of what it is now, but America has produced jocks that have been very successful, partially because there's a specific intelligence that comes with athleticism. Saying that we all need more Math Olympiads, and it's been Revenge of the Nerds for the last 20 years. I'm honestly sick of even highlighting it. Think about every villain you've seen in every movie in the last 20 years. It's been a jock or whatever. And I don't know. It's just not to say you need to be shoved in a locker thing, because I love nerds. I'm probably one of them myself. But like, dude, I don't need to hear it from you.
Well, but this is the thing that you're highlighting is like, and I think I feel this way because I'm an elder millennial, so like I have a lot of nostalgia, right? We're in that nostalgic era, the millennials are. But like, we can look back and say, oh, do you remember this one show everyone was watching, or this one thing happened? Like my kid, like Gen Z doesn't really have that, right? Everybody watches their little TikTok influencers.
Very
siloed,
like different,
right? But like now, everybody's going to be able to say, "Do you remember Trump and Elon Musk?" And it's not that everyone's going to have the same take, but everyone will know. Everyone will know what you're talking about. And for me, as a millennial who will die in a vat of nostalgia, I'm happy for that. I'm happy for us.
Rachel, you're describing my experience hosting the show. I bring up something probably once an episode where Josh Mercer is just like, Tom,
what
the heck did you just say? Like that, you spoke a foreign language. It's like, dude, you don't know this? Like everyone knows this. What are you talking about?
Like this, I know. It's like, how are we supposed to communicate across eras?
It's
now
crazy.
we have one thing that anchors us. Yeah.
Love it.
Okay, so Twilight Zone now. Rachel, I'm sorry. Did I blow your Twilight Zone? I think I kind of brought it up too soon.
I mean, that's okay. My other Twilight Zone moment recently was, did you guys see, I don't know if you can pull it up, but did you see the pictures of Joe and Hunter Biden meeting with the Chinese officials?
Yes.
Like, did those leak?
Yes. And it's like, this is just like, I want to be like, haha, it's all over now, so it's funny. But like, it's this ember of like
really
undying rage that I have, that like everybody knew this was going on. Right. Everybody knew this was happening. Everybody knew the Hunter Biden laptop was real. Everybody knew the guy was influence peddling. Everybody knew Joe Biden was in on it. But like, you were laughed out of polite society, banned on social media, shunned from, political debates for even suggesting this. And now it's like, oh, of course everybody knew. Right? Oh, of course this was happening. And like, it just, our politics is so fake. And I really just hope we can, like, this is why the place needs to be blown up from within. And I hope that it's disrupted substantially so this never happens again.
Totally. It reminds me of the Wall Street Journal recent investigation into his mental acuity. It's like everyone knew the guy was gone. Everyone knew, but everything you heard, sharp as a tack. Can't believe you'd say that, whatever. And now all of a sudden the Wall Street Journal decides, maybe we should dig in a little bit deeper. And then they reveal, oh yeah, we were pushing meetings in 2021 because he was having a bad day.
It is the biggest scandal, the biggest political and media and international corruption scandal of our time. And I hope the history books treat it that way, because it is a scandal in the way it has not been treated that way, in my mind.
The book of the Biden family. Yeah. I mean, my rage was just I was overcome with rage with the pardon. And so this
speaking
was
of, I'm not going to pardon him. I'm not going to pardon him. Pardon. It's like,
pardon.
That was low level, but.
Yeah, and it's just this like the smashing of the norms, and then everyone's like, "Oh, he was the president of decency. He brought decency back to the White House." And I'm like, "In what alternate universe did Joe Biden bring decency back to the White House? And why do we have to keep repeating this?"
He carries a rosary in his pocket, Erica.
To stuff down your throat. Remember that line from 1987? Right. Yeah,
I just saw a stat today. He's the president that has attended Mass the most of any president in history. So therefore,
Yeah. Do you know who else attended
I'm
Mass a
sure.
lot?
I'm sure the jailed pro-life protesters. That's great comfort to them.
yeah, right, totally.
Yeah.
The whole thing was a sham. Erica, what is your Twilight Zone?
Yeah, I'm having a hard time choosing, but I'm going to go with Amazon Prime. Speaking of cultural malaise, we had this story broke last week. Amazon Prime wanted to put out a shortened version of It's a Wonderful Life because who has time to watch 2 hours and 5 minutes of a movie now, especially during the holidays? We got stuff to do, people, places to go. So how did they choose to shorten it?
Oh no.
Instead of just like, clipping here, clipping a little bit there, maybe the dance scene could have been half as long. You could have cut the jumping in the swimming pool thing. No, they decided to cut out the entire 35 minutes of Pottersville, which is, if you will
What?
remember, the entire flashback to his life where he sees through his guardian angel's intercession.
What?
Right? It's the whole story. No.
Critical to the plot.
Right.
Critical to the plot. They just took out
35
the
minutes.
part where he sees what it would have been like had he never been born. It cuts straight from the angel pulls him
Makes
out of
sense.
the water. The
No
angel says, I need to
way.
get my wings. And then it goes straight to the end where the angel gets his wings and everyone's happy. And he's running through the streets being like, I love my life. It's great. It makes no sense. What cretin or troll living under the Amazon Prime bridge decided to make this? I was trying to.
way.
So I was talking to my kids about this and I was like, could you give me a comp? So the girls came up with, if you had Cinderella, the movie, and you cut from where the stepsisters rip apart her dress and like throw her in a ditch and laugh at her and they all go off to the ball to marry the prince. And then you cut to the wedding and you're like, oh, that makes sense. Right. Okay. Or for the guys, this was the guys, Star Wars, if you had the Return of the Jedi and you have the line, right, where the Emperor and Luke are doing the battle of the minds in the dark blackness. And the Emperor goes, even now your friends are walking into a trap. And then you see like Han Solo with his hands up and all the Imperial. And then you cut to the Ewok party where the ghost of Anakin Skywalker is like partying with
good.
the Ewoks.
Yeah.
That would be the same, about the equivalent, right? So those were my comps. I'm like, really?
So,
really? That was my Twilight
I've sent
Zone.
you this so many times, but you
Send
didn't
it
mention this,
again.
but it's similar. It's the new translation of the Odyssey.
Oh, yeah. That was my second one.
So Erica is our resident classicist, let's put it that way. She's very well educated and enjoys the finer things, which I appreciate. And I just could not imagine anything making you madder than seeing the new translation of the Odyssey being
by
just
Emily Wilson.
objectively terrible. Like who, and people even argue about the real nerds, they argue about the translations being like worse each time. It's hard to imagine one getting worse than this because they lose something every time. And clearly she was not faithful to ancient Greek or say the legends or that were important to them. Kind of similar, like they just cut out everything that makes the Odyssey. And they're like, okay, we're going to do this. But then a question for you. Someone saw that and they didn't need to cutting a half hour is pretty insane. I was like, oh, maybe they cut one scene or whatever. But similar to the translation, it's like someone saw that and was like, okay, something needs to be changed here. It was an intentional choice.
Right. Someone decided to do that.
Right. And they got
thought it was a
signed
good
off by
idea.
someone. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
These are the same people who think Emily Wilson is a good translator of ancient Greek. Or actually they probably haven't even heard of ancient Greek or Emily or the Odyssey, possibly. Because they just there was no sense of the story at all.
Right. No, there's actually no, it's not sense of story. There's no appreciation for the culture that produced something like that. There's no appreciation for the context in which a story like that's made. So they don't have reverence to the source material because in some ways they hate the source material. They hate the culture it came from.
Exactly. It's treating sort of cultural touch points like a film or like the Odyssey as the reason that they exist is as a weapon to further a current ideology. And that's the whole purpose of anything. Like why do some public school kids still get to read the Odyssey? Well, because there are people who feel that can be tolerated for the purposes of whatever they think education is now.
And they don't, by the way.
Right, which, very few people still can. There might be some districts somewhere that still allow it. But
I'd be shocked.
Right. But why are they allowed to read Toni Morrison or forced to read Toni Morrison? Well, because that piece of literature or art or our cultural heritage still serves the purpose of the education, instead of education being something in which which is the Western liberal arts understanding, that you encounter the voices of those who built and whose work endured the centuries in order to be transformed yourself. It's that we transform those works into the image of ourselves, which is what Emily Wilson did with this translation of the Odyssey. I have not read the whole thing yet. I've just done a few of the side-by-sides of my favorite passages.
Don't torture yourself, Erin.
I won't read it, no, but
That'd be hard.
wow,
That'd be hard.
the side-by-sides are telling. You're like, oh, this is tone deaf. No wonder people hate to read books now if this is how we translate them. Oh my gosh. So her first line, if those of you in the chat who haven't read it.
Sorry. Let me, out of respect for Rachel. Rachel, I said an hour.
Oh, right. Sorry, I was listening.
I'm really sorry.
Yeah.
And I know your husband.
It's trapped with our children.
Trapped with the children, which that's also actually a common theme on this show. My wife currently trapped with a child. Erica definitely trapped with children. Wonderful children, by the way.
Wonderful children.
But yeah, sorry. I did promise an hour. I'm going to keep Rachel an hour. Thank you so much. Rachel, if people want to find you, where can they?
You can find me on Twitter at Rachel Bovard, and then I am writing in various outlets, but I post everything there. So.
Okay, awesome. How would you rate your experience on this show?
10 out of 10.
10 out of 10.
Whoa!
Yes.
Winning.
Highly recommend.
Winning.
Well, awesome.
Great.
Well, Rachel, we definitely will take you back anytime you can give it. This was awesome. Even got the Josh Mercer approved in the chat, great show so far. And Josh is a tough critic.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, he's probably
saving
his own stand-ins too.
Yeah, he'll save his criticism for your private group chat.
Exactly. That's when, typically he does. But yes, thank you so much to everyone joining here live in the chat. If you want to help on the show, you can become a champion, support us monthly, CatholicVote.org/champions. You can email me, loopcast@CatholicVote.org. Please go support Rachel. Go follow her on Twitter. She's awesome. And pray for us, of course, above anything else. St. Thomas More, St. Fidelis, Our Lady of Guadalupe. Pray for us, and we'll see you guys on the next show. We're not going to do it on Wednesday. We're all out then, but we will be back